So we've said that these elections are historic. So what will the results mean for Turkey, the region, and for the rest of the world? Well, we've brought in a panel of experts to help us digest all this. Joining us on set, political writer Onur Erim. In the middle, journalist and commentator Selim Atalay, and completing the group from Washington, D.C., SETA Research Director Kilic, Bugra, Kanat. Thank you very much for joining all of us. Very briefly, you're all experts. You've all been following Turkish politics for many years now. It's an historic election. What's the one thing that you'll be keeping a very close eye on tonight?
Well, first and foremost, the presidential results, obviously. But if we go into details, of course, we're going to be looking for the percentage of votes our party will get as the leading party for the last 16 years and how many seats it will get. Of course, what HDP will get is something to very much look for, as well as E-parties and vote, because they're going into elections for the first time. It's a big mystery. We don't know what's going to come out of the box. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other things that we're going to be very watchful for.
Talking throughout the night. Selim?
I've been watching the reports. First of all, it's a peaceful election with no serious event or anything, so that's a great positive.
The Prime Minister, Binali Yildirim, congratulated the Supreme Election Council for carrying out a very professional election. Absolutely. Polls have closed, so that's one thing to be sort of grateful for.
A smooth election is there, so that's number one. Number two, Turkey is not holding the elections for the first time. A colleague had counted since 2012. Every 14 months, Turkey had gone through some sort of an election. That's quite a few elections. That means we must have matured a lot during the process. So that's a level of maturity in that sense. All the leaders emphasized the democratic participation and free will. That was the common point, which is the positive. What am I going to watch? I'm going to watch Istanbul results, especially given the last referendum's results where the vote for Istanbul was a no. So,
well, that was a referendum that was sort of pushed by the AK Party, and it was the first time sort of that we got results from Istanbul was against the AK Party. So actually, it's a good call. We'll be keeping a close eye on that. Anything else?
Majority. Istanbul and, yes, certain nerve centers that we'll be following. It's going to be a long night.
Kilic?
I think the most significant thing to watch in this election would be the voter turnout, because it's critical. Each and every public opinion poll demonstrated that the voter turnout will be more than 85%.
But Turkey has generally had very high voter turnout.
But this time they are expecting more. They are expecting nearly to 90% voter turnout. And if you look at the rallies, especially the mobilization of the opposition to its own voters, mobilization of AK Party voters, we have to expect that there will be a huge voter turnout tonight. And second thing would be the swing votes between Muharrem İnce and Meral Akşener, two opposition candidates. This would not only demonstrate which one did better in the campaign, but it will also show that what will be the fate of CHP after the elections. So Muharrem İnce's vote would be critical in shaping the Turkish opposition after the election.
Very good point. You talked about swing voters. Swing voters often determine the outcome of elections. Put this into perspective for our international audience. Who are the swing voters in Turkey? How large are they? And what factor are they going to play in this election? Onur?
It would probably take more than a couple of minutes to, label who the swing voters are.
We have all night.
But the important thing here is, I think, is that historically, 65% of Turkish voters tend to vote as to a conservative party. Now, it's very interesting to see we have 5 there, 6, 7, almost 8 parties that I believe attending the major. Some of them somewhat major parties attending, and out of the 7 or 8 parties, 6 are conservative parties, and they're in different blocks. So there may be a swing between left and the right, so to speak. There may be a swing within those blocks that have formed for the elections. So there's going to be a lot of things to analyze.
Do you think the potential swing between right wing and left wing is because we have a brand new political party with the E-party in these elections?
Yes, that, and also the fact that up until maybe a couple of years ago, something that would have been unthinkable in Turkey, in the same block, a party like CHP, a party like, well, E-Party is a brand new party, but a party like Saadet Partisi to be in even the same streets, forget about the same block, to go to vote. So I think we're seeing some changes in the Turkish political party system, and those that have been criticizing, and I'm not one of them for sure, as you know, have been criticizing the new system, has just, I think tonight, have witnessed the truth that, and the fact that this system is bringing to this country, which is bringing parties together and eliminating the 10% barriers within the system that everybody was so against for years.
Selim, who are the swing voters for you? I mean, do you agree with Onur? Like 65% of the Turkish electorate comes from a conservative base?
The demographics, yes, tell us that. But also, rather than a swing voter concept, that I believe there are tactical voters who just want to give a message to their own good old party leadership, message to the other side. So it's just tactical votes do swing. We've seen that in the last election. One thing important here is I think the 18-year-olds that would be voting for the first time, a considerable amount of number of 18-year-olds have voted in this election. So they will be quite influential, I believe.
Over 1 million new voters, and that's going to be interesting. We're going to get into this conversation a little bit later on, but when you think about what the AK Party pushed through in the April referendum, bringing down the eligibility age for members of parliament, that's an extremely important thing that's going to play in. Kilic, swing voters for you.
Well, swing voters, here is the thing. In addition to the tactical voters, there are really swing voters when you look at that. And considering the political polarization and party consolidations in different regions, you can see that these swing voters are 4 to 5%, and they are very critical in determining the outcome of the election. However, what we see is basically when you look at the parties that created the alliances, that formed the alliances, the swing voters were actually the voters that swing between these two parties. Especially in Inner Anatolia, there was swing votes between MHP and AKP. And now they will be kind of, like within the same alliance. And what we see, the biggest swing in terms of party swings is within the opposition alliance. When you look at the Millet Alliance, you will see that it is the biggest swing is between the CHP and E-Party. So in addition to that, there will be, I think, 2 to 3%, which would be very significant in determining the election. The swing votes between Saadet Partisi and AK Party would be critical, although Saadet Partisi is expected to get not more than 2%. Considering the close call in the polls, it would be very critical in, like determining the outcome.
Okay, just like to remind our viewers, polls have closed about 90 minutes ago. We're waiting for the country's Supreme Election Council to lift the media ban so we can actually start reporting results. And for that, we'll actually be crossing to Maria Ramos. But for the time being, we're actually continuing our discussion with our panel of experts. Onur Erim is a political writer, journalist, and commentator, Selim Atalay, and SETA, think tank SETA's research director, Kilic Kanat. I'm wondering why these elections were brought forward. It was an agreement between the AK Party and the MHP, and they came together and they decided to bring these elections forward from its original date of November 2019. Why do they prefer this?
Well, the official statement was because of with the request of the MHP leader, Mr. Bahçeli, to do this earlier. But if we, I think if we backtrack to the referendum, which brought upon this system to us, and the fact that most of the institutions have been, converting to this new system, and more were about to, it became a little bit hard for the executive power to, exercise its rights. Because on one hand, you had the problems and the people's, old memories of the old system, but hence, on the other hand, you had to bring in this new system and whatever else that came with it. It was becoming harder and harder. I think what should have been done in the beginning has been done with a little delay with Mr. Bahçeli's proposal and Mr. Erdogan's acceptance.
Is this a fair sort of analogy? Okay, we've bought our plane ticket, I want to travel now. They want to move over to the new system as soon as possible.
It was set for too far ahead, I think, personally, with the referendum, which it shouldn't have been in the first place. Whether this was, pre-planned or not is something we will never know. Obviously, Mr. President has never talked about this. Mr. Bahçeli has never talked about this. And these are the two that actually brought upon the early elections. So here we are.
Onur, but tell me this, then why was it the MHP's leader, Devlet Bahçeli, who sort of first voiced the idea of early elections and not the AK Party, because they were the proponents of the referendum?
Obviously, neither party leader has ever, to my knowledge, has ever said anything about in regards to this issue. Could it have been that Mr. Bahçeli felt that a sooner election will help his party get more votes, or the fact that especially the FETÖist threat was still continuing in the country? Especially after a tragedy that we lived through on the night of the July 15th, would be able to come back or would make another attempt. So we have to cut this off for once and for all. We never know, because neither party leader, to my knowledge or to my recollection, has ever commented about this.
Okay, just like to remind our viewers that we have 12 minutes to go, 12 minutes until the country's Supreme Election Council lifts the media ban. Then we'll be able to start looking at the numbers, both in the presidential race and what's going on in Parliament. But let's get back to our panel. Selim, Atalay, depending on how the results pan out tonight, looking back, is this a big gamble, a political gamble for the AK Party in terms of calling early elections?
Elections shouldn't be a gamble for any party, especially not the ruling party. But back to your last 12 minutes countdown, probably we should also warn that the early votes and early results are, as we call them, early. So we need at least, what, 3-4 hours maybe to get a little clearer picture. So that's number one. For the why now, but not to just shorten the uncertainty. Otherwise, everyone will be holding their breath until the proposed 12/19, and that would be a too long of an uncertainty period. And we know that election campaigning is usually uncertainty, and the country comes usually to a standstill. So bringing the date forward just helped cutting that uncertainty, cutting the maturity, as we call it. And we now have a clearer picture for the rest.
Kilic, I read your report about the elections. A very good report, very detailed, very insightful. Just tell us about some of the reasons why the country actually had to go to these elections much earlier than anticipated.
Of course, one of it was the Devlet Bahçeli's proposal, but why AK Party was basically accepted this proposal and moved forward, although they got both the parliamentary majority and the control of the executive presidency, is basically, as the previous panelist explained, the reform process need to be started, and there should be some structural changes in the government and how to govern the country. So there was a willingness in the AK Party and President Erdogan to fast-track reform and transition process, because the government transition processes can be, if it gets extended, it can be difficult, it can be crisis-driven. So this was a good opportunity for the government actually to form a new system and run the things as people accepted in April 2017 referendum.
All right, I can tell you that I can see results, but we can't officially report it. Some very interesting developments, but all right. So we said that social media is going to be playing a really important role in these elections, both presidential and parliamentary. Our Kamali Malburn has been keeping a close eye on what's been going on in the world of social media. Kamali, what's going on?
Okay, Alican, thank you very much. Yeah, we've been asking you to try and get in touch with us. #AskTRTWorld. And we've had a question come in already, as you can see here. And this is a question actually, Alican, for you guys and for the entire panel. Meryem, 2001, wants to know what's going to actually change in Turkey if in this new presidential system with a new president in place. Alican, if you could put that to your panel, that would be fantastic.
All right, Kamali, thank you very much. Kilic, let's start with you. One of our viewers was asking, what's going to really change with these elections?
So there will be a deep, like the very extensive structural reforms in the governing system. It would be an executive presidency. There will be no more prime minister in the system. There will be the role of the presidency would be expanded, so the ministers would directly respond to the president. The parliament will change its structure. Instead of 550, now they will have 600 parliamentarians. And as the constitutional referendum in April 2017 demonstrated, there will be deep reforms in how to make laws, how to run the government, and how to basically end the bureaucratic deadlocks that the governments, different Turkish governments, have been facing for the last couple of decades.
Okay, so that's all part of the 18 articles that was passed in the referendum of last year. But in reality, how is it going to change the way that Turkey is governed?
Sounds like a centralized power, but not quite, because we have a quite effective parliament structure, and which requires the president and the parliament to work in harmony, and not necessarily in the same, always almost necessarily in the same direction. Division of power, and also the checks and balances system, I double-checked, it's in place. Judiciary is there, so the more executive powers, a little bit more centralized, but I think the main target is to ensure stability, political stability, which is the key thing in Turkey.
One of the biggest criticisms of the new system, at least outside of Turkey, is that the lines between, the division between the three branches of government are blurred. Tell me why you think it's not.
Because it's very atypical of what's been used, what people are used to, especially comparing to the system in the U.S., which is, we could call this the father of presidential systems, in modern ways at least. As compared to that, it does seem somewhat blurry. But you have to understand, U.S. has been exercising the system for the past 200 plus years. It will not be a system that will be in place overnight. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we will be enjoying more benefits of the system. Could it have been better set up? Yes. But the point is that it was set up. Going back to the question that my colleagues to my left took earlier, what does this system will bring? I think it will bring two things to Turkey, which is very much needed. One, it will enable the executive power to do what they're supposed to do, and two, it will not be anymore in Turkey where losers will be in power. If you lose, you'll go. It's simple as that. And again, very respectfully disagreeing with your earlier statement, every election is a risk. Every election is a gamble. But thank God, Mr. Erdogan is not one of those party leaders, he's not one of those politicians who's afraid to go to the public, because he says, if they're not going to elect me, I don't need to be here. It's simple as that.
So this could actually very well determine his political legacy, these elections.
Absolutely.
Okay. Fair enough. Kilic, do you think the referendum that was taken on April 16th of last year, is this the best system for Turkey right now? Onur said, it's the step that we had to take. It's in its infancy. We will grow over time. But is this the best system for Turkey?
Well, Turkey has been having this governing system crisis for a long time now, especially after the 1980 referendum. There was a lot of debates about how to establish a new system and how to establish a new civilian a civilian constitution. The 18 articles were basically aimed to fill some of the gaps that has been open in the governing system, and they responded to some of those crises. However, as we know, in each and every governing system and transition of the governing system in different parts of the world, these are not written in stone. So the implementation and how you work this out would be an important determinant. So when they think, if they may see that there are some other problems and there are things to fix, as we see in different constitutions, they can amend those articles and create a more kind of functioning system. But this was a right step forward at this point.
Okay. Less than 4 minutes to go until we find out who is leading in the presidential race. Is the pro-Kurdish HDP above or below that all-important threshold of 10%? Will the AK Party have enough votes in parliament to reach a parliamentary majority with 301 seats? About 3 minutes left. Onur, I want to ask you. President Erdogan said that this system is necessary because of the dysfunctional political landscape it had with with coalitions in the past. I'm going to paint you a picture. President Erdogan, the incumbent candidate, gets a second term in office, but the parliament is controlled by opposition parties. Isn't that a type of coalition? Doesn't he still have to sort of put on a good face politically, diplomatically, and work with them?
He can, but if he does, first of all, bear in mind, from now on, to come into power as an executive office in Turkey, you don't need the parliament. To stay in power, you don't need the parliament either. And it wasn't the case before in the parliamentary system. He can do that.
Well,
But
the parliament can actually call for early elections. They can dissolve.
It's an extreme majority vote, though. But if he does, come in 5 years, he cannot blame anybody in the parliament for a re-election. So, yes, if he wants to form a coalition within the parliament, let's say President Erdogan gets elected in the next few hours, and let's say for a second that the majority is not in the Cumhuriyet İttifakı. Can he go into a coalition with other parties or other parliamentarians? He can. But the minute, or come in 5 years, if he doesn't succeed in ruling Turkey, he will not be able to blame with any other party within the system, within the parliament, or any other parliamentarian. So he could do it, but he will be putting his own power into risk come 5 years.
Some people are actually listening to Onur and saying, this is way too much power for one person.
Again, Turkish model, what is this system a replica of? No one. I mean, while being structured, this model is just taking some ideas from the US system, some in South Korean, and also domestic experience, domestic political experience had played a great role while structuring this system, which is avoid coalitions as much as you can. Just coalition governments have cost Turkey a lot. Everyone knows that, and political stability is key. So the system actually encourages political stability for the sake of stability.
All right, just under 30 seconds to go. Kilic, any
The current constitution actually gives, with the new system, a lot of power.
Kilic, I'm just going to have to actually just hold on for a second. We have some breaking news now. The country's Supreme Election Council has lifted the broadcast ban. I can tell you that one candidate is up to an early lead. Standing by is our Maria Ramos, who can give us the latest numbers. Maria, let's start off with the presidential race.
Thanks so much, Alijan. Yes, we have those numbers in right now. Let's take a look at the presidential race, that crucial presidential race. And this is what it looks like at the moment. So we have the incumbent, President Erdogan, with 59.6%. There you have it, a very big lead right now. And second is Muharrem İnce with 26.1% of the vote over here. And in third is Meral Akşener with 7.8% of the vote. There you have it. And in fourth is Selahattin Demirtas with 5.4% of the vote over here. And next is Temel Karamollaoğlu with just under 1% of the vote. And finally, we have Doğu Perinçek with just over 0.2% of the vote. And just a reminder that around 19.6% of the ballots have been counted. So all of this could change anytime soon. It is still very early on in the evening. So yes, we exercise caution. Right, let's move now to the parliamentary results. We'll bring you that actually back. I'll bring you the parliamentary results later. Back to you, Alijan, for the moment.
All right, Maria, I think the set looked great. Maria just told her 1/5 of the votes counted, but President Erdogan out to a very early and very strong lead, more than twice the votes of his nearest competitor, Muharrem İnce. I know you're expecting this, but let's start off with Selim tonight. Expected result?
No, opinion polls, I've been very skeptical during this election time about opinion polls. Turkey is in major transformation. Major stakes are in place. So I'm not sure opinion polls this way or another or the other have really reflected the
Well, one of the biggest
situation.
problems of opinion polls, I think all of us would agree, is that the sample size was extremely small.
Sure.
And polls have not only gotten it incorrectly in the past, not only in Turkey, but also in the States. We saw it with the U.S. elections and Brexit as well. Onur, do you think the incumbent candidate, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, can actually hold on to a nearly 60% lead?
Well, we'll see as the night goes along. Again, I assume that most of these 20% of the votes counted coming from the eastern part of Turkey.
That's traditionally what happens.
Maybe overseas votes as well. I don't know yet. Yeah, it's a very good lead to start. And again, as I mentioned, I don't know if in this program earlier, but to me, an overwhelming majority for a presidential race will be anything about 51 to 52%. So this is an extremely big lead. It may erode going down tonight, but it's a very good lead to start with.
Kilic, your thoughts on the initial numbers?
Well, it was expected. In each and every election, we see these results. At the beginning, we have this large margin, but it also shows that it continues, that pattern continues. And in previous elections as well, even in the referendum, we see that the yes votes and AK Party got more than actually the platform that AK Party supported got more than 50% of the vote. So it's important that this is 1/5 of the vote. So it is a huge sample actually. It may be a geographically biased sample at this point, but it's a huge sample and it shows a great majority. And Muharrem İnce and other opposition candidates need to get landslides basically to catch up with Erdogan at this point.
All right, gentlemen, lots more to cover. We have a long night ahead of us, but let's actually turn our cameras to the Turkish capital of Ankara, where our Turkey political correspondent Andrew Hopkins joins us now from outside of the AK Party headquarters. Andrew, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan out to a commanding lead, 51.1%, 59.1% of the votes have gone to him. Just over 1/5 of the votes counted, but this is something that the AK Party should be very happy about at this point.
That's right, Alican. Throughout this election campaign, really, when you've talked to AK Party politicians, they've been really not really countenancing anything other than a straight win for the party, both in the presidential elections and in the parliamentary elections as well, for their alliance, the People's Alliance, which they formed with the nationalist MHP party. When the current Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, when he was leaving his home in Istanbul earlier this evening, he was asked by some of the reporters there about how he thought it was going, and he said, "I'm not really sure yet, but I have a good feeling about it." I think you probably hear that from most politicians, whichever country they're in. They don't really talk about or countenance a bad result for them until it actually happens. In this respect, it looks like it's going very well for the president. We'll have to see what happens in the next few hours or so. But if he does manage to keep up a 60% support rate in this presidential election, then it will be more than he actually got back in 2014, the very first time a president was elected by the people in Turkey, when he just got 51% in the first round. It was enough to stop him going through to a second round in the election, but it's still substantially less than the figure he's on at the moment.
All right, Andrew Hopkins live for us just outside of the AK Party headquarters. We'll be coming back to you in just a moment, but let's cross town. Courtney Keeley, TRT World's Courtney Keeley, is outside of the CHP headquarters. She's been closely following the developments throughout the day. Courtney, speaking to Andrew, the AK Party camp seems extremely happy with where they stand. Just under 59%, looking at the latest numbers, going to the incumbent candidate, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Muharrem İnce, a heated personality, a popular personality, not only amongst his camp, but also through various groups in the country too. He has less than half of the votes that President Erdogan has. Is this a disappointment for them?
John, not yet. It's just really early, and it has just been announced, these early results, mainly from the east. Now, interestingly enough, it's a small crowd here at CHP headquarters. Muharrem İnce is not here yet. It's unclear whether he will come in hours to come, depending on how the results go. But right behind me, people are watching Fox News. They're now watching the results. They are being broadcast. And just a few minutes ago, people started chanting, President İnce, Başkan İnce, Başkan İnce. They certainly are still trying to rally. Like I said, it is just the beginning of the results, and there's more excitement here, actually. They're not really taking this lead by President Erdogan very seriously. We'll see how this mood continues as more results come in. Alican.
All right, Courtney Keeley outside of the CHP headquarters in the Turkish capital, Ankara. Thank you for the moment. And to you, Andrew, we'll be coming back to you throughout the night. Let's turn our cameras to where we are, Istanbul. TRT World's Caitlin McGee joins us outside of Istanbul. Caitlin, we were talking about President Erdogan watching the results from there. We talked about his sort of famous saying in the past that if you can't win Istanbul, you cannot win Turkey. He's out to a commanding lead. What's the mood like where you are?
Well, yeah, out to a commanding lead indeed. That news will be to the absolute delight of the crowd that's gathering here. Just in the last sort of half an hour, we've had buses come in to drop people off. So the mood is kind of slowly building. It's certainly excited. There's a lot of AK Party supporters here, and they have reason to be confident. Recep Tayyip Erdogan has never lost an election in his political career. He is extremely popular. However, there are some buts. He is also a controversial figure. A lot of his policies have been criticised domestically and internationally. And there are economic issues too. The lira has lost 17% of its value in the last few months. Inflation is rising. So it'll be interesting to see whether that resonates with voters, but certainly out to a very strong lead there, and that will be absolutely welcomed by many of his supporters.
All right, TRT World's Caitlin McGee watching the developments just outside of the Huber Palace. That's where President Erdogan is actually watching the results. Let's turn our cameras to Diyarbakir. Melinda Nusifora is there for us in the southeastern city. Melinda, I'm looking at the numbers now. Selahattin Demirtas, the HDP's candidate, at 5.6%. Our panelists were saying that sort of these initial votes that come out generally are the ones that are voted from the eastern part, Diyarbakir, in the eastern part of the country. Yep, Demirtas stands at 5.6. Some would say it's a disappointing number for him. What's the mood like? What are you reading from the people?
Well, the information that we've received, Alican, is that so far we've only had about 9% of the vote here in Diyarbakir counted at this stage. We're outside the city's counting centre. So what happens is the votes are counted at the polling booths, observed by officials and political party representatives. They're then put back into those polling boxes and brought here under escort by political party representatives and some armed guards. And then they're recounted inside to make sure that that vote and those counts are 100% accurate. We're being told that so far only about 9% of those votes have been recounted here, and judging by those figures, Demirtas is looking at about just over 57%. But this is a pro-Kurdish area. This is his heartland, so you can understand that he would get a very strong vote here. As the votes continue to trickle in, more votes are counted. We would imagine here in the Diyarbakir region that those numbers would be quite significant for him.
All right. Melinda Nusifora, live for us in Diyarbakir. When you look at those numbers in Diyarbakir, Selahattin Demirtas, 58.2% going to him. A commanding lead over Recep Tayyip Erdogan, which stands at 34.2%. Possibly in previous elections, we've seen a larger margin for the HDP candidate. All right, let's get back into our studio. More than 1/4 of the votes counted, 26.1%. President Erdogan holds on to a lead. Although his lead has been falling. When we first broke, once the media ban was lifted, he was over 60%. Now it's about 58.5%. But 26% of the votes counted. I mean, we're seeing a trickle down, but also the number of ballot boxes that are open. It seems like it could be a difficult sort of gap to close for the opposition members, opposition party candidates, right?
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And as I said, for if somebody's going to win tonight and not carry to second round, at 51, anything above 51 to my assessment will be an overwhelming majority. So if this number goes down to 52, 53, 54, it will be a huge landslide for what seems like right now for Mr. President Erdogan to win.
The concept of 50% plus one is a noble one. That's given. But when we think of especially European elections, it's really hard these days for any democratic government to secure, or a candidate to secure 50%. I mean, Turkey's threshold is quite high. When we look at the elections in French presidential elections, for instance, okay, first round, second round, German general elections, we are looking at political leaders with 20-25% core base, and then maybe additional votes in the second round. But my point is, the threshold is quite high, and in terms of democratic representation, Turkey gets another mark for this. Again, for any candidate to get a 50% is quite a noble act.
Kilic, I mean, is it something spectacular that President Erdogan is sort of achieving with this such a high percentage?
Well, of course, you know, when we are talking about the election, there was almost an artificial nervousness, artificial excitement about the elections, but none of the public opinion polls, and nobody in Turkey is challenging the idea that Erdogan will win this election in one way. So it may be 49%, it may be 51, 52%. The question is whether it will go to the first round or second round. And all of the public opinion polls in the second round also demonstrated that Erdogan will win the election. And there was no question that AK Party will be the first party among the votes and among the members of the parliament. Of course, this is important, and when you look at this for the last 16 years, the history of the AK Party, this election will be another election that AK Party get the great, you know, like in terms of the percentage, the great percentage, and there will be at least 20-30% margin between the opposition, the lead opposition, and Erdogan and AK Party. So this is kind of, you know, like the very much expected. An important democratic maturity of this election will be, considering the alliance system, we are expecting that at least 98-99% of the ballots actually would be represented in the parliament. So all of the political parties will be, most of the political parties, at least 6 of them will be represented in the parliament. And this is something important for democratic representation of the different ideologies, different political views in the parliament.
Gentlemen, thank you for the time being. We said that these were historic elections, 2 elections, one for the president and one for parliament. President Erdogan holds a commanding lead in the presidential race. But what's happening in parliament? For the first time, Turkish voters were able to vote for political alliances. On one side, you had the Nations Alliance. On the other side, you had the People's Alliance. And then you had a non-aligned party with the HDP. Let's get to our Maria Ramos and who could actually give us an update on how the alliance is doing in the parliamentary race. Maria?
Alijan, so this is very interesting right now. So 11.9, nearly 12% of the votes have been counted for those parliamentary results, and this is what it all looks like. So we have the People's Alliance, which of course is made up of the AK Party and the MHP, and that right now has 65%, which translates as 432 seats. But all of this could change. It is still very early numbers. Let's look now at the Nations Alliance in there at 25.4%, which translates as 168 seats. And that is, very interesting for early results. And look at this, the HDP there, and they have 7.3% of the vote, inching nearer to that all-important 10% threshold to make it into Parliament. But it is very early on in the evening, and all of this can change anytime soon. And just a reminder that that was nearly 12% of the votes counted for those parliamentary results. So I'll pass it back to you for you and your guests to crunch these numbers and see what it all means. Alijan.
That's what we're going to do, Maria. All right. Just saw the graphic on the board that Maria was looking at. Probably for me, the most striking bit was the HDP at around 7.3%. What does this mean?
Again, very controversial policies, and in a lineup until the election day, the crucial point was whether this party could distance itself from the terrorist organization. And everyone is fed up with this. Terrorism has been going on for decades. There have been various attempts to solve this issue. It's for many, actually, this is solved when an supposedly armed group is being represented in a democratically elected parliament. Then that movement should be over. There should have been no reason for an armed wing of a political movement. But we haven't seen that. So that's the dilemma.
Just like to remind our viewers that the way that the vote counting actually happens in Turkey is that both the envelope is opened, the presidential ballots are the ones counted first. So we're actually seeing, in terms of the numbers, the votes counted, the presidential race being sort of more ahead in terms of the parliamentary side. The numbers there, only 12.5% counted. HDP, 7.3, as is, they're not able to enter parliament. What does this mean for the future of Turkish politics?
One of the most critical part of this campaign season was HDP and how HDP will perform in the election. Because many opposition parties actually considered HDP as an important asset, because according to them, in order to defeat the AK Party majority in the parliament, HDP had to pass the threshold. And what one of the panelists stated about the tactical votes, one of the critical tactical votes was kind of calls from some of the leading figures in Turkey that HDP needs to pass the threshold. So we need to, if we want to defeat AK Party in the parliament, at least in terms of majority, we need to vote for the HDP. And so far, in the first result, we saw that didn't happen. But we have to keep in mind that in 2015, when HDP got its highest vote ever, 13%, and the most significant voting bloc that supported HDP at that election was the Istanbul voters. Some of the votes that come from the Istanbul, that was the game changer. And the fact that they lost 2% of that vote in the November election demonstrated that they couldn't meet the expectation of this more kind of ultra-leftist groups in Istanbul and other major cities. And especially for the last couple of years, they performed really poorly. They disappointed people in central, southeast Anatolia, actually. And the referendum results actually also showed that there was another disappointment, that the vote of the no even went lower than the November votes. So if we see this, we will, or if it reaches to 8 to 9%, and if it remains under the threshold, there is a fact that AK Party will gain this as a single party, not as an alliance, the majority in the parliament. And secondly, it would be a huge, basically, disappointment for the HDP itself. And probably HDP will have a soul searching after the election in terms of what they did wrong, that in 3 years they lost at least 40% of their votes.
Okay, tell me this. You had mentioned that the HDP was seen as a critically important piece in these elections. Why wasn't it included in the Nations Alliance then?
Well, probably the most significant reason would be E-Party and Meral Akşener's attitude towards the HDP. They tried to establish an alliance, but they considered this strategically not very smart, because then both the nationalist voters of the E-Party and CHP may tilt towards MHP. So they considered this not a good timing to be in the same picture with HDP before the campaign.
Okay, but let me paint you this.
Yes.
If the Nations Alliance is supposed to attain any sort of parliamentary majority, reach that critical 301 mark, most likely they're going to have to do it with the HDP.
Yeah, but it will be after the election.
Oh, okay. Onur, Erim, let's talk about political alliances. This is the first time that Turkey was able to go to elections where political alliances were formed. Why?
Well, I mean, if it did nothing else, it actually addressed the issue, which a lot of the opposition leaders, especially, were were worried about and had been talking for years, that with the 10% barrier, the election barrier for parties, that they got left out. I don't agree with most of these talks, For example, with Saadet, Saadet's, I think, biggest, during the campaign, biggest claim was that now that people know that we have no barrier issue, people, our actual voters will come back to us and vote for us. Although their election history doesn't say that, an easy answer would have been to that, would have been to go back to local elections for the municipal elections, which they got either the same or the less vote, which there is no barrier. So if it addressed nothing else, it addressed that. But also, don't forget, despite especially the West's criticism against President Erdogan's policies, President Erdogan always tries to be inclusive of everybody. I've been hearing a lot, especially in this election, from the West, especially the Western journalists, that, oh, what if the HDP, gets left out of the parliament? There's an impression that HDP represents Kurds in Turkey. If they did a little research, that they would see the percentage of Kurds in Turkey by population, that percentage is far less than the ethnically Kurdish parliament members of even AK Party. So we do not have a representation issue of Kurds, ethnically Kurdish Turks, Turkish citizens in Turkey. But unfortunately, there's been all this illusion, especially by the West, that there is a problem like that in Turkey, and HDP it would be the only one to resolve this. The problems of Kurds are in Turkey, the ethnically Kurdish Turks in Turkey are different.
Allow me to interrupt for just a second. Do you think the ethnic Kurds or ethnically Kurds who are members of parliament but are members of other parliament actually stand up for their rights, or do they go with the party agenda?
Well, there's the biggest problem. The problems that they're suffering is problems that everybody else suffers in Turkey. Going back to Mr. Demirtas, having spent the campaign trail from the prison, should that have happened? Well, if you look at it from a judicial point of view, no. Nobody should be in the prison for 20 months for anything,
trial,
but without a trial. But at the same token, and I'm sorry for saying this, nobody should even be allowed, like Mr. Demirtas, who has made those statements about the leader of PKK's PKK leader, who's in prison for a couple of life sentences, Abdullah Öcalan. A person like that who talks about the PKK terrorist organization like that should not be allowed to run, let alone outside. So it's the judicial problems in Turkey that has been under custody for 20 months. And everybody else in Turkey suffers these problems. It's not just Mr. Demirtas.
Think of it this way. Maybe this is a right analogy, maybe it's not, so correct me if I'm wrong. The Catalan regional leader, Carles Puigdemont, for him to be able to run in the president for Spanish elections, that would never happen.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, let's actually talk about what's going on in Parliament and bring in our Turkey political correspondent, Andrew Hopkins. He joins us from outside of the AK Party headquarters. Andrew, we were talking to you about the presidential race. President Erdogan holding on to a commanding lead. Looking at the latest numbers, he's just over 57.5%. I'm looking at the number of votes counted, just over 1/3. Now, the situation is actually quite similar in the parliamentary race. AK Party holding on to another commanding lead. More than 50% of the votes cast in the parliamentary election have actually gone to the AK Party. A commanding lead. What can you give us from Ankara, from the AK Party headquarters?
Yeah, Ali Can, if these figures actually stay the same as the evening progresses, remember, as you say, it is very early days at the moment, but it's going to be really looking like a kind of clean sweep, if you like, for the AK Party. They're going to be winning the presidency, looking like in the first round. There won't be any need for a second round on July the 8th, and also the parliamentary elections as part of its alliance, the People's Alliance with the MHP there. In the presidential election, than 57% of the vote, and also well over 50%, 60% in fact in the parliamentary vote. This is the ideal situation really for the AK Party under this new constitution, because you will have pretty much the President and Parliament in agreement in what they are going to do in future. The numbers that the opposition have, they won't be able to oppose much in any terms really, any legislation that is put forward. So it's looking good for the AK Party at the moment. It does seem that, as one of your guests said there, that they are able to benefit at the moment from the performance of the mainly pro-Kurdish HDP, which is still under that 10% threshold at the moment. If it does manage to get across it again, then it will have seats in Parliament. And the way the Turkish electoral system works, and the way that many sort of political analysts suggest this will work, is that if the HDP doesn't get past that threshold, then all its votes, all its seats then go to the other most popularly supported parties in those areas. And really in the east and the southeast of Turkey, there have only been two parties at the races in recent years, and that is the HDP and the AK Party. So as long as the HDP stays below that 10% threshold, it looks like the AK Party is poised to benefit.
Indeed, that does seem to be a correct assessment, and an assessment that's actually been sort of echoed by our panel of experts. All right, let's bring in TRT World's Turkey political correspondent Hasan Abdullah, who joins us from the western city of Izmir. Hasan, looking at the numbers, Muharrem İnce on the presidential race, 28%. He is creeping up. If the numbers stand as is, it means that the CHP candidate will have gotten a much higher number in previous elections. On the parliamentary side, it's gotten just under 17%, 133 members in parliament. That's what it translates to. What are you feeling? What are you hearing? What are the people saying to you there?
Well, Alijan, at this point in time, people don't come across as too nervous, because the voting continues. And of course, here in Izmir, this is the stronghold of the CHP. But at this point in time, the people I've spoken to, they don't seem too dazed. Now, if you look at the results from Izmir, then obviously this is something at least to make the people of Izmir happy. About 17% of the ballot boxes have been opened so far. And at the moment, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is faring at about 35.3%, whereas Muharrem İnce from the CHP is at about 51.2%. And of course, the counting continues. These are the two main contenders in Izmir as well. So this is something that the people of Izmir are happy about at the moment. But again, the counting continues. And on the other side, the AK Party supporters, they're saying that this time things could change. Now, whether you look at it as too much optimism, or perhaps they have reasons to believe that they've been working too hard and campaigning, and they may be able to change some results, even though it doesn't come across as too realistic. But if you look at the past trends, we do find the AK Party has made some gains, even though perhaps not so significant in relative terms, but they have made gains in Izmir. But of course, at this point in time, İnce is at about 51.2%, and Erdogan is just about 35%. The voting obviously continues.
All right. TRT World's Turkey political correspondent Hasan Abdullah joining us live from the western city of Izmir, a CHP stronghold, and they're doing well in that market, in that province rather. Let's turn it back to Maria Ramos so she can give us an update on the presidential race, where the incumbent candidate Erdogan is still holding on to a commanding lead.
Alijan, he is indeed, and now 35.3% of the votes have been counted. Actually, it has just jumped to 36.3% of those votes counted for the presidential results, and this is what it looks like. President Erdogan, the incumbent there, he has 57.3%. It has dropped since those results came in, as you mentioned, Alijan, but still a commanding lead there at 57.4%. Next, trailing is Muharrem İnce there with 28.1%. 28.1% Muharrem İnce. And next third is Meral Akşener with 7.5% of the votes. And fourth is Selahattin Demirtas with 6% of the votes. There you have it. And let's look now at Tabel Karamollaoğlu, who's still under 1% at 0.9%. and Doğu Perinçek at just 0.2% of the vote. So that is how the presidential votes stand right now, with 36.3% of those votes counted. But Alican, as you know, and we've all mentioned, it is very early on. All of this could change in a flash. So the night is young. Back to you, Alican.
All right, thank you. President Erdogan, 57.3, just over 1/3 of the votes counted. Back to the table, voter turnout. The country's Supreme Election Council has just announced that 87% of the eligible votes cast their vote in these historic elections. Not as high as the 90%, but still a very good number.
Yeah.
And I believe it's actually higher than the previous elections. What does this mean?
It was 85%.
Okay, slightly higher. But Turkey has generally had, you know...
But, you know, like the margins are so thin that 1 or 2%, you know, extra voter mobilization can change things. So the question before this was, okay, there will be higher turnout, but would it be for the advantage of AK Party and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, or would it be the, you know, like the advantage of the opposition? For those who were telling that it would be the advantage for the opposition, were telling that, well, Muharrem İnce could mobilize the masses. Now they have some belief that they can change the things and it would mobilize. On the other hand, many people said that AK Party voters kind of used to see the AK Party electoral victories. So they may not be that interested in the ballot anymore. So they were telling that if, you know, like that there will be a threat that things may change, they can actually mobilize and they can go to the ballot at this point. So at this point, it shows that it played for the advantage of AK Party. And although it is the 33% means 1/3 of all the ballots are open. So as I mentioned before, it would take a landslide victories in the western cities for Muharrem İnce to change the trajectory right now, which seems very difficult.
All right, over 1 million Turks cast their vote for the first time.
Which
18 years old. It's a huge sort of piece of the pie.
Sure.
How do you think they factored into all these?
Isn't it great to be counted? I mean, the teenagers are being counted.
But think of it this way:
matters.
for a lot of them, the only leader that they've known is President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. How does this fit into the psychology of these young voters?
Again, let's compare the turnout with the so-called advanced democracies of the European Union. Again, France is in mind, Germany is in mind, or even Eastern Europe. Maturing democracy like Turkey showing up at the ballot box and just casting their ballots and turning out the percentages as they are is good enough credential for an advanced democracy. I'm proposing that Turkey should be elevated from this point on.
A higher tier of democracy.
Of course.
Onur, Erim, Kilic Kanat was actually talking about sort of, you know, if it's in the higher 80s, each percentage point actually could work well either for the AK Party or could work well for the opposition. We're seeing how that's playing out. But in every Turkish election, there's always a very high number of invalid votes. It was over 1 million, I think, in the last election, and it's been around that number. How do these invalid votes sort of play into the equation and affect the outcomes?
Well, having been involved with a lot of on-site election issues in the past years, first of all, I do feel that some of those, or maybe a good majority of those, are actually some kind of force in return for some kind of a protest against a candidate or against the system or against a party or whatever have you. The more complicated the elections get, I remember, I think it was it may have been the 2015 election, I think. The more complicated they get, the more envelopes you have, the more choices you have, the margin of error just goes higher. This is I guess, is one of the benefits of the system. It's a very simple and pure decision. You vote for a president, and then you vote for a parliament member. Before, you had to think about which party or which parties to vote within a family, within a group, within a whatever amount of group of people you're in, and then you had to think about, okay, if these guys get this many votes and these guys get this many votes, if they form a coalition, who will be the prime minister? The guesswork is out of the picture. You directly vote for the guy who you want the country to run for the next 5 years. And then you go back and you vote for the parliament member or the party that you want to see in the parliament in a majority. Simple as that.
All right, gentlemen, I hope you're comfortable in your seats. We still have a long night ahead. But let's bring our viewers up to date with the latest numbers. On the presidential side, the incumbent candidate, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is holding on to a commanding lead. Just under 40% of the votes counted, with 57.2% of the votes going to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. On the parliamentary side, the number of ballot boxes that have been opened are a little bit less. That's just over 20%. And the AK Party percentage of votes is just under 50%. Let's hand it over to our social media expert who's keeping an eye on everything with Kamali Marbon. Kamali?
Ali, I'm not sure I'm the expert, but I'm here to help as much as I can. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone. Take a little breath now. We can take our time. As we say, it's going to be a very long night. The results are slowly coming into us. But the gentlemen were just talking there about the youth vote. And we thought we'd take an opportunity to have a little bit of a look at how youth are trying to be engaged with in social media. We take a look at this package that we've put together just about that and about how young people are trying to be engaged with and brought to the polls.
As Generation Z cast its first votes in Turkey's elections, all the parties and their supporters were getting more creative online to get first-time participants. Almost 1.6 million new youth voters were expected to take part in this election. Parties updated campaigning tactics like handing out flyers to using social media to capture the young. Take this AK Party YouTube series. It features new voters tackling big issues.
Arkadaşlar ne dersiniz? Oylamaya geçelim mi? Olur. Geçelim. AK Parti hükümetiyle ve Cumhurbaşkanımızla devam diyenler.
Some parties like the CHP are using animation to draw in fresh voters. And even the Saadet Party is promising to make gaming more accessible for young people. Parties like the HDP are tweeting constantly to get the attention of new voters. And Turkish voters aren't shying away from expressing their views by using humour.
To find a candidate.
Has the party with the most successful online campaign captured the hearts of Turkish youth?
Of course, the question at the end of that is still to be decided. We'll find that out later in the night. Now, as we've said, we've been asking you to try and get in touch with us at the hashtag AskTRT. We've had a few questions coming in. I want to put this one, first of all, to our panel of gentlemen, and first of all to Selim. This kind of brings us up to speed with some of the dialogue that we've had online, really about how Western media covers elections in Turkey and how Turkish elections are covered by Western media. This one says, what happens in some coverage of the Western press in relation to the Turkish elections is a kind of intractable psychosis, and they're published. I don't know why. I mean, Selim, first of all to you, why do you think there is such a difference in the way that Turkish elections are covered by the Western media?
Yes, that's. I have a personal problem with that too. Just reading out the whole Western media, actually certain Western media, and we can even figure out without looking at who reported this. The source can be guessed very easily. In other words, some so-called experts in the West, and these are usually the media correspondents, pretend that they know Turkey so well that they repeat the good old cliches, and they just repeat the good old cliches of the past, and we are just seeing the repeating of that pattern. Turkey has changed. Turkey has changed a lot. It takes a lot of effort to understand the new situation within the country. I just feel that it's political. It's mostly political bias influencing the Western media at this process.
It certainly is, perhaps in that respect, Selim. I mean, we've had another question come in. You guys can all see it on your screens there. This is if the vote goes to a second round. Perhaps, gentlemen, you can pick up on that. What do you think will happen if we do have to go to a second round on this presidential vote?
Onur, let's start off with you. I know that you think it's not going into a second round. The numbers point to that, but anything can happen tonight. We're seeing actually President Erdogan's numbers sort of come back a little bit, but it's normal. We've seen this in previous elections too. What happens if it goes to a second round?
On July 9th, we have a second round, election. It's easy as that. And from this point, I think we could say one thing. I can't really claim that there's any leads in our hands that it will go to the second round. But if it did, it looks like Ince would be the second candidate in the runoff election, and then we would have a runoff election on July 9th.
We've had another question come in. This one is about foreign policy. If we can just get the next question up in the wall there. Depending on who comes into power, of course, we've got the results coming through. We're not sure how it's going to play out. Do you think, gentlemen, that there'll be a change in any way that Turkey's foreign policy is influenced around the world?
Kilic, Bugra, Kanat, Turkey's foreign policy extremely complex. And almost an 8-year war going on with one of Turkey's neighbors in Syria. Relations with its strategic ally, the U.S., have never been as strained as they have before. Closening with Russia. Do you think there could be a sort of a significant change in foreign policy?
The question says if the opposition wins, you know, like would there be any difference in the foreign policy? But so far in the campaigns, what we see that most of the candidates, other than Tayyip Erdogan himself, who's basically the president of the country right now and who's much more informed in terms of foreign policy and experience in negotiating these things, they didn't have much policy in terms of what they will do in foreign policy. Their election manifestos and electoral platforms were basically thin criticism of the current Turkish foreign policy. However, they couldn't elaborate about what they would change in Turkish foreign policy in case they were in the president or they were the governing party. So what we see as the main criticism was both Muharrem İnce and Meral Akşener developed a very anti-Syrian refugees discourse throughout the campaign, which was kind of considered not very ethical by many people, not only in Turkey but around the world as well. And they were critical about Turkey's Syria policy. Muharrem İnce said he can meet with Bashar Assad, but he didn't say what will be the conditions to meet, when, how he will meet, and what would be the Turkey's expectations in these meetings. There was some criticism from Meral Akşener in terms of relation with European Union and other things, but again, she didn't elaborate what she is planning to do. So as the voters look at the election promises and electoral platforms of these opposition candidates, they see that they are not very well prepared to actually lead and become the top diplomats of Turkey to run the very complex negotiations, considering the complex geopolitics around Turkey right now.
All right, we talked about the youth vote, but also one important thing that we should talk about is the expat vote.
Yeah.
More than 3 million Turkish voters were eligible to vote in this elections. The voting period for them was actually ended a little bit earlier. Nearly 50% of the eligible voters actually turned out at the ballot boxes to cast their vote. A majority of them actually were in Germany. Well, TRT World correspondent Abu Bakr Al-Shamahi joins us from the German city of Cologne. He's joined by Tamer Cansız, who's the Secretary General of the Union of International Democrats. Abu Bakr, let's hand it over to you.
Yes, as you said, the voting period took place earlier for the expats. So, for example, in Germany and across Europe and across the Turkish diaspora, they were able to vote between June the 7th and June the 19th at various different missions and representations in their countries of residence. And then they also had the option of voting on the election day in Turkey itself at land crossings and to airports, for example. Ballots were set up for them to vote. But what was the importance of this election for them? Why did so many Turks across the diaspora, and especially in Germany where the biggest Turkish diaspora is, why did they come out to vote? For more on that, as you mentioned, we've got Tamer Cansız. He is the head of the Secretary General, of the UID. Now, Tamer, what are the main issues? What are the main points of concern for Turks living in Germany with regards to this election?
I mean, the importance of that election was, of course, the stability, political stability, the security, and the development which Turkey has made in the last few years.
Okay, but I mean, the kind of what brings them to come out to vote here in Germany, considering that obviously these are people who don't live in Turkey itself. These are people who live outside of Turkey. Why do they choose to come out in such particularly high numbers?
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, the people, even though the Turks living abroad here, especially in Germany, live for many generations in Germany, they have still strong relationships with Turkey and their families. So they are totally interested on what happens in Turkey and how their family feels.
And can the Turkish government, how does it actually affect Turks living in the diaspora? What can the Turkish government actually do with regards to their daily life?
I mean, there are so many things. We have issues with cultural identity, with maintain and especially protect the language skills and develop the language skills. And Turkish government can do a lot of things in this regard. For this reason, we can hope that the development opportunities in the last few years can maintain and continue in the next period.
Now, it's not particularly strange for diasporas to vote in various different countries across the world. But when it comes to the Turkish one, it's such a high turnout, or such big numbers we're talking about here who are coming out to vote. What is the identity issue here? Can we say that perhaps Turks living abroad feel more Turkish than they do their local countries, their countries of residence, or are they between countries in terms of their identity?
Well, we have a lot of issues in terms of racism, discrimination in Germany especially. And of course, we need to think about all these issues, and people do not feel actually of all these issues. And they feel much more connected to Turkey in this regard, yes.
Okay, and again, the vote is big here. How is that going to affect the vote in Turkey itself? Can the diaspora vote swing the vote in Turkey?
I think so, because, I mean, especially here in Germany, most of the Turks living abroad come from Germany, and they can decide the election at all. Yeah, and I hope we can, we can contribute on that election in a very well manner.
Okay, thank you, Tamar Jansiz. Now, of course, we do not have the vote tally for the diaspora vote as of yet. We're still waiting for that to come out, but it will be significant and it will be very important for the final election results.
All right, TRT World's Abu Bakr Al-Shamahi joining us live from the German city of Cologne. Thank you, and we'll be crossing back to you a little bit later on in the evening throughout our rolling coverage. All right, let's cross over to Maria Ramos, who is standing by for us. She'll take a closer look at the presidential results in that race. President Erdogan is holding on to a commanding lead still. Give us the numbers.
Thanks so much, Alican. And he is indeed, President Erdogan is holding on to that commanding lead. So let me tell you, the number of ballots that have been counted is 46.6%. We're inching closer and closer to that halfway mark, and this is what it looks like right now. So the incumbent President Erdogan has 56.7% of the vote. And next, trailing him is Muharrem İnce with 28.5%. And in third is Meral Akşener with 7.4% of the vote. And fourth is Selahattin Demirtas he has 6.3% of the vote. And let's bring in the other two, and Temel Karamollaoğlu still under that 1%. 0.9 there, still hasn't moved. And Doğu Perinçek finally, well, he still has 0.2% of the vote. Not much change for those last two there. And Alican, this is still early on in the night. It's just gone 7:30, everybody here in Istanbul, and 47.6% of the presidential votes have been counted. So everything you see here could change. But yes, President Erdogan is still holding on to that commanding lead. I'll hand it over to you and your guest, Alican, to crunch these numbers.
All right, Maria, thank you. We'll be coming back to you in just a short bit. I want an update on the parliamentary situation, but let's get back to our panel of experts. Every election has a theme, whether it's the economy, whether it's national security, whether it's rights, whether it's we don't want the old system, we don't want the new system, we want the old system. For you, what do you think the voters thought about most? What do they consider the most when they went to the polls today?
I think with this election, it would be hard not to say the economy played a big role in how the voter turned out or how the voter decision was made. But let's underline, and we have been, in Turkey, we have been suffering a little bit of a downfall in economy for the last year and a half. Of course, the fact that we have been in a war for the last almost 2 years in Syria and in northern Iraq and northern Syria, that we have been helping over 4 million refugees from Syria in this country have all played into this. But also, economy played a big role, but also let's underline something, especially now, for those of us that are in favor and adamantly in favor of the presidential system. Tonight, because the sides are exactly the same right now as it was in the referendum. Tonight, we see that with the million new voters, the Turkish voters, as the numbers right now, have actually increased their support against everything else, against all the odds, increased their support for the presidential system. Because if it ends up this way, 56% of the votes also shows a voter confidence and a voter more approval level of the system itself as well.
Onur, you're confusing me. You said that the voters were actually had the number one thing on the voters' mind was the economy. Yes, when you look at the first quarter growth, over 7%. But the reality is that the Turkish lira has taken a massive hit since the New Year's. Inflation, again, it's in double digit and it's creeping up. The current account deficit is over $50 billion. Unemployment is high, even higher when you consider youth unemployment. So we're looking at this picture. If I was a voter, I wouldn't vote for the AK Party then.
Well, you have to realize, though, we as a country are very, and have been in the last 16 years, very integrated with the West. Every Western country within the same time period lost value against the dollar. The biggest reason for that is the U.S. Fed has been increasing its rates for the money for the last almost a year and a half now. So, and if you go to Europe, any country in Europe, especially those that are more industrialized, you see the problem of unemployment, you see the problem of income, you see the problem of expenditures going higher and higher every day. So yes, we have been suffering for the last, as you said, year, maybe almost 2 years, but this is the problem in the entire West right now. We may be suffering this. We may be feeling the problems of this, the result of this, a little bit more than Germany, a little bit more than UK or the US, but we're definitely in the league with them, and we're going to get through this one way or the other.
But the reality is, when you look at the past 16 years, the AK Party took on a country that was in economic ruin, was bound to the IMF financial system. It's taken the country from $2,000 per capita income to over $10,000. It's been massive infrastructure projects throughout the country that have basically helped all of our lives. So they're saying basically our past is our sort of promise for the future. And I think that's what probably is playing more heavily.
Absolutely. The economy does play a role. Of course, everyone thinks their pockets and their wallets, but they also don't want to lose what they have in hand. So the real risk is, in this election, was at least keeping what you have or losing what you have. So I think the vote, in the sense, in terms of economy, the electorate understands that growth is there, but yes, the first quarter growth was impressive, but more things need to be done. Yes, the economy management also agrees with that. Second thing, this election is about political stability and continuity. So, because the opposition said, oh yes, it's enough. And economically or politically, there were not enough reasons, as the results show, for the electorate to say, okay, that's enough for the ruling party and for President Erdogan. So it's a renewal of confidence vote for the president, for the AK Party to do more than what they've been doing before.
Two things. When you look at the elections for the last 16 years, you see basically a correlation between the AK Party votes and GDP growth. So when you look at the GDP growth rates, you see that the only year that it was minus was 2009 local elections, which AK Party so far in its electoral history did poorly compared to others. So, lost cities like Antalya in the elections. So when you look at the GDP growth rate and when you look at the AK Party votes, it shows that correlation is continuing. Secondly, we have to understand that Turkish society is politically very informed society, which means that when you look at the shows on TV, primetime shows are usually the TV news shows. So Turkish people follow what's happening in the economy around the world as well. And one significant thing, although the problems that you mentioned exist, it is the question is who the people in Turkey holds responsible for the, for example, the exchange rate. And from the, by watching all of these news shows, they at least have known by, compared to any other European ordinary, European countries' ordinary citizen, they know the Fed rates. They know what's happening. They know the tapering down that's taking place in Fed. They know the European countries and economic crisis. They know the several, the different economic trends that has been happening in the world. They know the Trump reality, and they know how Trump is affecting different things. They know how dollar is gaining ground, not only against Turkish currency, but all of the currencies around the world. So that also played a significant role in the voter preference.
What about the Syrian refugee crisis? Turkey hosts the highest number of refugees of any country in the world. More than 3 million Syrians, hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and other people and other refugees from other countries. It's had a huge burden on the Turkish economy. Lately, especially in the latter part of the campaigning period, we've seen certain political parties come out and say, if we're elected, they're out the door. We're going to send them back home. How has this all played in?
Horribly. And it just casts a big shadow on the Turkish national concept of mercy and coordinating and cooperating with your neighbors, helping out your neighbors. Syrians are here as refugees, as we said. They are here to save their lives. Actually, we are saving their lives, and they're appreciating that. So, and this is a temporary situation. Everyone should know that. So there's absolutely no room in Turkey to play alla Italiano, La Liga, or the other populist parties. Or AFD. Turkey doesn't need an AFD like the German fascist party, which says all the foreigners and all the immigrants are out. No, we don't need that. And Turkey has played this situation well. Court has actually managed it well, and we are almost closing to an end of it. So just a little bit more patience. It will be over.
Kilic, was this a mistake by the opposition parties to actually come out with these type of statements?
I thought they thought that, just like in the United States, just like in Europe, there is a populist wave, a nativist wave, a protectionist wave that will basically in favor of excluding refugees or against any kind of immigration. However, the country's history shows that even starting from the Balkan wars, that, most of the people who had fled from those kind of situations come and seek refuge in Turkey. So that was one thing that the opposition candidates underestimated. Second thing, there is a trend right now. When you look at the Euphrates Shield operation, when you look at the cities like Jarablus, Elbab, you will see that around 160,000 Syrian refugees actually voluntarily went back to Syria. So Turkey's, when the government was explaining their plan about the refugees after so much criticism from the opposition candidates, they basically said that we will try to have now a safe zone in Syria for the Syrian refugees to securely go back to their country and live there. And most of the unwanted incidents that took place was here and after kind of abused by some of the opposition candidates, and their discourse didn't strike a chord among the people who are even not looking very favorably for the economic and social cost of the refugees.
If President Erdogan continues with a second term in office, how do you see this all playing out, continuing with regards to the Syrian refugee crisis, relations with the European Union? What's your take, Onur?
I think President Erdogan has, this maybe seem like, especially with the West, that he's softening up with their relation with them. But I don't think that's the case. The case is, I think the West, this start with the UK, that I see these in the last 6 months especially, they start understanding the Turkish point of view. Turkey is no longer, and has been for the past, especially in the last few years, but for the past 16 years, has no longer been the US's or the EU's, go-getter. Just do this or do that. Turkey started, rising against its own feet. Rightfully so, from our point of view, and has been doing things in the region for stability. Turkey's reaction to the problems in Syria and Turkey's overwhelming support, as in the case of the refugees, and the money that we spent on this issue, is not just because we are a very humanitarian culture and a nation, but it's also because to bring stability to the region. If you had left all those people out there to be killed by a dictator like Assad, the region would have been a lot worse. And we will suffer always 10 times, 100 times more than Russia, more than UK, more than US, more than Germany, because they are our neighbors. They have been for almost thousand years, and they will be, they will be for the next 1,000 years. So Turkey does things for its region. Turkey does things for herself. This was not the case up until 15, 20 years ago. And the West, especially the US, will understand this as the time goes by.
All right. One more thing for this refugee thing. And as I said before, this is a very politically informed society, and especially the border cities of Turkey with Syria. The society over there understood the dynamics of the refugees and what happened to them, and they know that they are fleeing from a very difficult situation. In cities like Kilic, whose original population is 80,000, today it is 200,000. And we didn't see a huge mass kind of upheaval or uprising against the refugees in these towns. And the most significant reason is they know what happened to them and they know where they are fleeing from. So I think the opposition candidates underestimated this wisdom and informed nature of the Turkish society while handling the refugee crisis.
I mean, and that sort of falls in line with sort of the results right now. When you look at sort of the provinces that border Syria, the Hatays, the Kilis's, the Gaziantep's, the Şanlıurfa's, all of them, President Erdogan's AK Party is out and holding a favorable lead.
Yeah. Also, speaking of refugees, the Damascus regime, the Assad regime, do not want them back. They've passed a law recently that practically prevents any refugee who had left the country for some time and their property is seized or is about to be seized. Everything is being just confiscated by the Damascus government, so they may not have a place to go unless secured.
Let's put a pause on this for a moment. Sure. There's lots more to talk about. The night is young. There's some interesting developments on what's going on in the parliamentary race. Some political parties are creeping very close to that 10% threshold. But let's go to our Turkey political correspondent, Andrew Hopkins, who's just outside of the AK Party headquarters in Ankara. Andrew, looking at the numbers, President Erdogan just above 56% of the votes going to him. Just more than half of the votes have been counted. There is a bit of a sort of a tick downwards in his numbers, but he's still holding on to a commanding lead. Just give us an update from the headquarters.
Yeah, Ali Can, just before I got into that, I just want to talk about these turnout numbers. 87% you mentioned a short time ago. That's actually one of the biggest turnouts in a Turkish election in modern history. They often get over 80%, but to get close to 90% turnout is something quite rare in Turkish elections, and that probably gives you sort of an indication, really, a number of motivations about what's going on here in this election. Maybe people are thinking about the significance of this vote, that it's the first time they'll be voting because of this new presidential system, also because of the wide range of presidential candidates on offer. There are two alliances fighting each other for power, for the presidency, for parliament in this election as well. So I think this this is quite a highly unusual turnout in the Turkish elections this time. But on to what's happening for the AK Party. I think there's going to be a lot of officials in the building behind me going to watching this with interest, how all these figures crystallize in the coming hours. Because when we were first allowed to report these results a couple of hours ago, we were looking at President Erdogan in the presidential race at about 60%. As more and more results come in, he's gradually moving down and down. So he's now at about 56.3%. He's still got to lose another 6% or so before he's going to actually have to take part in the runoff in 2 weeks' time. So there is a way to go, but it is part of a downward trend. And also they're going to be looking at these figures from the HDP, the mainly pro-Kurdish HDP, who as time goes on, they're gradually creeping up and up. And just looking across at the board next to me now, it's 9.3% for the HDP. And if they get past that 10% figure in the final total at the end of the evening, that could have a very big effect on how many seats that the AK Party wins in Parliament and whether they really actually are going to have a majority there.
Some very important points made by you, but you talked about President Erdogan losing 6 percentage points. If he does, it means there's going to be a second round. And if there is a second round, most likely the candidate will be the CHP's Muharrem İnce. Covering the CHP side is our Courtney Kilic. She's just outside of their party headquarters. Courtney, just give us an update on what the mood is like over there. Muharrem İnce spoke in front of the Supreme Council about 2 hours ago. He had cautioned the Turkish voters to stay calm, to display, not to display any sort of extreme acts. Where is he now? What's the mood like at the CHP headquarters?
Well, people have definitely settled in after the initial excitement. They were watching the results on the big screen behind me, broadcasting Fox, Turkish television. But at the same time, the deputy head of the CHP here, headquarters, was saying, we have our own results. We're not going with the AA agency results. Now, theirs were a lot lower. They say that Erdogan has not crossed the 50% threshold. Meanwhile, the presidential candidate of this party and their alliance, the National Party, is outside the Electoral Commission headquarters, saying he's standing by to make sure the votes are counted cleanly. Now, he also had, the party and the alliance has had 100,000 people across the country. And as Charles said, and as you've mentioned, there's a huge turnout across the country. We're only at just over 30% at this point. And right now, they're settling in for the evening. Alican.
All right, Courtney Kilic, just outside of the CHP, the country's main opposition headquarters. All right, in the lead is Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He's looking for a second term in office. Now, he called these snap elections. It's a vote that will likely decide his political future, and he's hoping to cement his position within the country's new political system. He's won every vote in his last 16 years in power, but Turkey's economy is struggling, as we talked about with Onur Erim, and he faces a strong opposition campaign, but he's doing very well up until now. Let's take a closer look at who the man who called this vote.
Aziz milletime buradan şükranlarımı sunuyorum.
All right, some interesting developments happening on the parliamentary race. Two parties are nearing that all-important 10% threshold. For that, let's bring in our Maria Ramos, who can bring us up to date with the latest numbers. Maria?
I can indeed, Alican. Very interesting numbers indeed. And 43.7% of the ballots have been counted. And this is what the alliances look like right now. Here we go. With the People's Alliance, 58.8%. And let's bring up the Nations Alliance. And there you have it, 30.5%. And next, a very interesting development is the HDP. That's the pro-Kurdish group there with 9.2% of the vote. Why is this interesting? Because they are inching closer and closer to that all-important 10% threshold to actually get into Parliament. Because if they don't, then as we've mentioned throughout the evening, they'll have to divide their seats throughout the other two alliances. So there you have it. That's what it looks like right now. It is early days at the moment. 43.7% of the ballots have been counted for the parliamentary votes, and this is how it stands. And a question to your guest, Alican, why is this 10% threshold the highest in the world?
Bugra, 10%, it's high. I mean, many countries actually have these thresholds, but not as high as Turkey. Why does Turkey?
Well, there have been debates about removing this threshold. It is many political parties actually agree that there's a consensus that it is higher. So far, there wasn't enough consensus to change it. But the reason was when it was established, there was, again, the political stability is the key. So to prevent, like splittist parties, the parties with very little votes to be in the coalition, in the parliament, which would make it in the parliamentary system very difficult to establish governments and form stability in the running of economy and politics in the country. So after this political system, this systemic change in the governing mechanism in Turkey, now we can expect that this will be debated. Probably after this election, there will be more debates about this. There was a way to resolve this. The alliance system was basically pulled out to remove this threshold problem. However, we will continue to have probably discussions about that in the aftermath of the elections.
Okay, as is, the 10% threshold is in place. I'm looking at the latest numbers. Now, Maria just gave us an update on the alliances, but I think we need to look at the specific party performances, which are probably more important right now. The numbers that I'm seeing right now, the E Party, the newly formed E Party by Meral Akşener, break away from her former party, the MHP, the Nationalists. She stands at 9.4%. The pro-Kurdish HDP stands at 9.3%. As is, if the election were to end right now, it means that neither the E Party nor the HDP would be represented in Parliament.
No, E Party will be represented because of the alliance
the HDP.
that they are in. But HDP will not be represented.
Okay, but if both of these parties actually pass that 10% threshold, it could very well drastically change the dynamics of the parliament.
HDP's, the E parties vote don't change anything because they already have the alliance system. But HDP votes especially, it will change the system and it will change the distribution of MPs. And the biggest influence, of course, it will have would be the AK Party seats in the parliament right now.
Okay, AK Party right now, if we do the math, it's about 356 members in parliament. So they have the parliamentary majority without the need of the MHP. If the HDP gets in, they may actually fall below the 301 and may actually need the MHP.
Even if it is not below the 300, it will be a razor-thin majority for the AK Party.
So it's critical.
Let me just intervene there, though.
Sure.
President Erdogan, from day one, since the talks between the two parties have started, before the alliance, before the joint actions that they took politically, has been talking about this alliance to be not just for an election, not just to have a majority in a party, or not to win presidential elections. President Erdogan, and I believe the party chairman Bahçeli said the same thing, that this was an alliance to enhance Turkey to the next level. So it wasn't a concern of elections, it wasn't a concern of parliamentary seats, nor winning the presidential race. It was something higher than that, it was something more noble than that. So whether the AK Party wins by a good number of seats in the parliament all by itself or not, I don't think we will see a dissolvement of this alliance after the election either way.
but every alliance is some sort of marriage. And I'm going to be sort of the marriage counselor analyzing these different alliances just after a short break. Let's actually turn our cameras to Istanbul here. TRT World's Caitlin McGee joins us in Istanbul from Sarıyer, where President Erdogan is actually at. Caitlin, we're hearing that there are large crowds gathered outside of the Hubei presidential palace. That's where President Erdogan is. They're calling for him to come out and make a speech. Just give us an idea what's going on. We can see some people waving their flags behind your back.
Hi, Alejandro. Well, I can hear you, but only just because it is very noisy here, and all these supporters are gathering, and they are fired up. Now, our cameraman Hakan's just going to pan to my left to give you an idea, a bit of a sense of the numbers that are starting to show up and how excited they are. Lots of flags being waved. They've also been chanting Recep Tayyip Erdogan's name. Now, we've had word in the last couple of minutes that Erdogan is likely that Recep Tayyip Erdogan is likely to come out and speak. And as you can see behind me, people are now being allowed up to the presidential palace, where they will be able to go and listen to him come out of that residence and speak and address those crowds. He will do that before then moving on to Ankara. So people here very excited, very noisy. And you can hear this starting to chant a little bit now.
Yeah. All right. All right, TRT World's Caitlin McGee just outside of the Hubei presidential palace.
So
all right, we're going to come back to you. I think we're experiencing a slight audio problem. It could be because there are a lot of supporters, Erdogan supporters, over there, but we'll be sure to cross back to Caitlin. Let's come back to our panel of experts. We were talking about alliances. When you look at sort of the AK Party and the MHP, that alliance actually could have problems when you're moving forward too. We were talking about some of the potential cracks. Sooner or later, the refugee crisis will be sort of overcome, but the AK Party will have to deal with the Kurdish issue.
You have to, from what we have seen so far, and we haven't seen much because it's actually going to come about when we start seeing actions in politics in the way the government is ran. But as you saw in the last almost 10 months now, that both parties seem to have determined their common denominators very good. Both parties respect one another as a separate party. They're not saying, nor they have ever said that they're going to agree on everything, but they're on some common issues which they apparently decided on in the beginning. They're joint in doing the same, in making the same decision and doing the same policies. Now, besides that, as we saw, and this was a very risky thing to do, right before the election, Chairman Bahçeli started talking about the pardons, the general pardons for those in jail. Mm-hmm. And AK Party, not just Mr. President Erdogan, not just Prime Minister Yildirim, almost everybody else said, no, we don't think this is a good idea. And actually it was President Erdogan that said, I don't see the right in myself to pardon people that have done wrong to other people.
Okay, let me put the scenario up for you.
Go ahead.
If the HDP passes that 10% threshold, if AK Party falls below 301, it needs the MHP to get sort of a parliamentary majority. Will they bring it up? Will the MHP actually bring up these sensitive issues?
It might, and we could only see that when we get to that place. But what I'm trying to say is something much higher. The way they have portrayed and the way they have shown us the performance so far, even if the AK Party passes the 300 threshold in the parliament all by itself, it will still respect the views and the points of the MHP party, because both chairmen said, both President Erdogan and Chairman Bahçeli said, this is something longer, this is a involvement longer than the elections themselves.
Okay. Selim, two alliances. We're just talking with Onur about the People's Alliance, the AK Party and the MHP. That is a more natural alliance than the CHP, E Party and the Saadet Party, which constitute the nation's alliance.
generally, Turkish electorate is just can be grouped into two, right and left. Now, MHP and the AK Party have actually more in common than the divisive issues or just conflicting policies. And in the past, they have actually coordinated and cooperated well. The MHP's support to AK Party has been, on numerous occasions, very well noted. So, again, when it comes to the right or center-right to left division, AK Party still wins in that sense by ad hoc coalitions, by de facto coalitions in parliament, outside parliament, so like the alliance that's happening right now. And also this E-Party, the phenomenon, if we may quote-unquote call it, E-Party was, I think, designed to replace, again, quote-unquote, the MHP. So this election is also about a test for the MHP to prove itself and re-emphasize its policies vis-a-vis this new E-Party, which sometimes is hard to define. So the ad hoc, let's put it this way, AKP-MHP coalition or alliance is more permanent than the other one.
You're talking about the E-Party. It has its roots with the MHP. Do you think the performance of the E-Party in these elections will set the tone for the nationalist movement in this country?
Well, here is the thing. The biggest problem of Meral Akşener was she was trying to locate herself in the electoral map in Turkey and political map in Turkey. And she didn't want to be only the party of the nationalists because she knew that the total nationalist votes wouldn't pass to 15 or 20% of the votes. She tried to be very ambitious and she tried to reach out the center-right voters in AK Party. So she wants to get the attention of them. She wants to gain their votes in order to be kind of, like the leading opposition candidate. However, this mixed messaging cost her dearly. So on the one hand, especially in terms of the
But she also got support from the CHP as well.
Yeah, so. she got that was the problem. She got the support from especially in the Ege region, in the Western Asian region, in the western part of Anatolia. She gets some support from the CHP voters, but then she lost it to Muharrem İnce. But the critical part was, okay, if she is a nationalist candidate, there are certain things that nationalist candidates want in terms of discourse and politics. And she couldn't show that. And her responses for the issues that MHP voters considered very significant was not satisfactory for the nationalist voters in this country. On the other hand, while she was trying to reach the center-right voters in Turkey, she did several mistakes that will isolate her from that part of the electorate as well. So she was trying to balance that, but I think she failed to attract neither whole nationalist voters nor any kind of significant portion of the center-right voters.
All right. We're going to come back to you in just a moment, but we were talking about voter turnout about 10 minutes ago. 87%. That's what the country's Supreme Election Council has given in terms of the latest numbers. 3 million expats, quite a high number, were eligible to vote in today's vote, but not as high as the 87% we saw in Turkey. Nearly 50% of the eligible voters came out across 60 countries and cast their ballots for both the presidential race and the parliamentary race. A lot of that came from Germany. TRT World correspondent Abu Bakr al-Shamahi joins us from the German city of Cologne. Abu Bakr, let's hand it over to you. How has the voting gone over the voting period in Europe and in Germany?
Yes, well, there wasn't any voting today in Germany. The voting period occurred before, so between June the 7th, June the 19th, members of the Turkish diaspora went to missions, representations based in their own countries of residence and decided to cast their ballots there. There was the option, however, on the election day itself for people to travel to Turkey, to the land crossings, for example, or even to airports where ballots were set up to also cast their votes there. But in terms of going to the representations, going to the missions, often it was a difficult journey. People were traveling 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers simply to cast their votes. A lot harder than say, voting in Turkey, where you can simply just go down to your local neighborhood school and cast your vote itself. We do have a voter here with us, Adem Gungurmuş. He is a Turkish Belgian. You're a student, an entrepreneur, and you volunteer as well. But I want to know, why did you decide to cast your vote? Why did you decide to go to the effort of going and traveling and casting your votes?
So I'm someone who goes to the mosque each Jummah for the prayers, and I'm also someone who is in the community, who tries to do something for the community itself. And I see from friends, members, organizations that they are following up with the elections in Turkey. It's always discussing about improvement of Turkey. And if you talk about Turkey, you also need to vote for Turkey. That's why I voted for the Turkish elections. I did 70 kilometers to vote. It was on 8, so we had a double 8 because there was friends and family coming to our house for eating from the sugars and so on. But we also needed to go voting. So my brother called me up and we went to the major city to go voting. It was on a Sunday and it was full. There were more than thousands of people. There was a line of queue. And it was like seeing the Turkish community going voting made me more happy about the Turkish future.
And you can perhaps understand that, say, older Turkish voters in the diaspora would decide to go out and vote in the Turkish elections. But for young people like yourself, people who are born and raised in Europe, who have never lived in Turkey, why did young people decide to come out and vote as well?
First of all, young people like to discuss about the future of the world, the global world. If we see to US, if we see the Brexit, if we see the European refugee crisis, then we say we need to vote. We need to vote in Germany, in Belgium, in Europe, and also we need to vote in Turkey, because we know what happens in Turkey. Also, the improvements in Turkey benefits the European Turkish nation and also the Belgians, Germans, the European itself.
And do you feel your Turkish identity is more important than your Belgian identity, or is this a case of both identities being equally important?
So for me, I don't discuss identity. I discuss the future of the globalized world. If I go voting, I vote for Belgium, I vote for the European Parliament, and I also vote for the Turkey because I have the chance to vote. And each chance we need to benefit and use in which country it is.
Okay. And how significant do you think your vote is going to be in Turkey as a member of the diaspora?
We know of the past elections that the European votes showed that a major significance in the European votes, and we see that the ballots are more than 50% of the voters voted in Europe, so it's a significant value for the voters in Europe to vote for Turkey.
Okay. Thank you, Adam. Some very interesting points put across there. Of course, we still don't know what the final tally of the diaspora vote is. It has proved significant in the past, giving seats to various different parties. Like I say, as of yet, we still don't know, but it will most likely be important for this election result and the final tally.
All right, Abu Bakr Al-Shamahi live for us from Cologne. And as soon as we get those numbers in terms of how the expats voted, we'll come back to you for a little bit of analysis. All right, there were two races today, a presidential and a parliamentary one. On the presidential side, if any one candidate surpassed the 50% mark, they would actually secure the top job in the first round. There is one candidate who's actually in the driver's seat, and that is the incumbent candidate, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He is still holding on to a commanding lead. But let's bring in our Maria Ramos, who can actually break the numbers down and give us an update on where we stand. Maria?
Alijan, yes, the incumbent President Erdogan is still very much in that driver's seat. And right now, it's just nearly 8:15 here in Istanbul, and 64.7% of the votes have been counted. And this is what it looks like. So incumbent President Erdogan has over there 55.6% of the vote, and still trailing is Muharrem İnce with 29.1% of the vote. Third is the only woman in the pack is Meral Akşener with 7.5%. Next we have Selahattin Demirtas with 6.7%, and fourth Temel Karamollaoğlu there with 0.9%, and that hasn't changed all night really. And finally Doğu Perinçek with just 0.2%, and again that hasn't really changed. That hasn't changed this evening. And just remember that the magic number we're looking for here is more than 50% of the vote, but it is still early. The night is young, and 65.6% of the votes have been counted. So this could all change. But right now, as it stands, it's President Erdogan. He very much still has that commanding lead with 55.6% of the votes. Alican, back to you.
Maria, thank you very much. All right, our Turkey political correspondent Andrew Hopkins joins us now live from just outside of the AK Party headquarters in Ankara. Andrew, last we were talking about whether the HDP was able to pass that 10% threshold. If they do, it would dramatically affect sort of the members of parliament that would actually that would come from the AK Party in parliament. How's the feeling? How's the mood over there?
Yeah, it's getting closer and closer, really, as to the HDP approaching that 10% threshold. It's getting very interesting, both in the presidential election and the parliamentary election, as Maria just pointed out there. In the presidential election, about 64% of the vote counted. The Turkish president, his vote is gradually creeping down, but with 64% of the vote already counted, it'll have to drop sort of fairly fast for it to go under 50%, and him have to be forced to take part in a runoff on July the 8th. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But the really sort of nail-biting one at the moment is the HDP that you mentioned there. I think we're looking at 54% of the parliamentary votes counted. The HDP now up to 9.6% of the vote. Now, if it passes that 10% threshold, which all parties have to pass in the Turkish political system to actually get MPs in parliament, that could have a huge impact on what the result of this overall sort of election is, because at the moment they won't get any seats at all, the HDP, but if they do, they will get some. And there are only two parties really in the race in the southeast, the south and the east of the country here in Turkey, and that is the HDP and the AK Party. And if the HDP don't get those MPs, the votes and the seats get redistributed to someone else, and that's likely to be the AK Party. They're the ones who are going to be benefiting. So it's getting very close here, and depending on what happens tonight, if the HDP do pass that threshold, there is a possibility here of possibly the Turkish president winning another term in office, but not having a majority in parliament. But we'll have to wait and see. Still plenty of votes to be counted.
Andrew, you said it could be close, but there's a very jubilant crowd of supporters behind you, just like we saw when we were crossing over to Caitlin McGee, who joined us from just outside of the Hubei presidential palace. Explain the mood for our viewers. They're fairly confident that the candidate that they're supporting will actually lock this up in the first round. All right, I think we're experiencing some audio problems. We do apologize for that. All right, we're going to try to bring in another one of our political correspondents, our Hasan Abdullah, who joins us from the western city of Izmir. Hasan, we saw big rallies by the Turkey's main opposition party. When you look at the presidential race, Muharrem İnce's numbers are creeping up. They're just above 29%, but still very below President Erdogan's commanding lead of 55%. Just tell us what the mood is like. I believe you're at a polling station right now.
That's right, Alican. Here in Izmir, the results are quite different from the overall results we're getting from the rest of the country. So, for example, if you look at the presidential race here from the Izmir province, so far about 38% of the ballot boxes have been opened, And at this point in time, Muharrem İnce stands at about 52.9%, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan stands at 33.9%. If we look at the results that have emerged so far for the parliamentary vote, then we can see that so far about 24.3% of the ballot boxes have been opened, and at this point in time the CHP has about 40.4% of the vote from Izmir. The next one is the AK Party with 29.4% of the vote, E Party in the third place with 10.8% of the vote. The HDP in Izmir has 10.2% of the vote so far, the MHP 6.6%, and the Saadet Party at 0.9%. So of course this is quite different from the overall result we've been getting from the rest of the country at the moment. The counting of course continues, and there's a fair bit of chance of any sort of significant swings.
All right, Hassan Abdullah live for us at a polling station in the western city of Izmir. I want to turn back to our panel of experts. Hassan was talking about the opposition candidate Muharrem İnce. He's the only candidate that isn't leader of a political party. Why is that?
Well, the problem occurred actually in CHP while they were trying to find a joint candidate for the opposition. After that failed, actually, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu didn't want to show himself as the candidate. Many people were expecting that will be the dynamic. However, he kind of refrained from losing another election to Erdogan, which would be detrimental to his political career as well, and which would, Muharrem İnce was the opposing candidate for him in the party congress. And by showing Muharrem İnce as a candidate, he thought it would be a good idea to get rid of a political opponent as well within the party.
Throughout the campaign period, we didn't see much of a Muharrem İnce, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu sort of coming up together.
They didn't show any kind of, like working relationship. Partly, Muharrem İnce was trying to reach to the voters of AK Party, and he, in each and every political rally which he organized, 107 political rallies, he mentioned that he left the CHP now, he's the candidate of Turkey, so everybody in Turkey can trust him. However, basically, right now the outcomes showed that he couldn't achieve that. He got some support, but most of those supports, when we look at the polls, it comes from E Party, basically.
Selim Atalay, is Muharrem İnce a more inspirational politician than Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu?
Has been always very interesting on who's going to be leader of CHP, and usually not the party members, but the delegates rule on that, not the voters, but interestingly, the delegates rule on that. So the current debate actually is, okay, the İnce running for president and such, but the more crucial question in the CHP minds were who's going to be the party leader after the election. And
that's what I want to ask, Onur. You're a political expert. Look at these numbers. Muharrem İnce, just under 30% of the vote in terms of the presidential race. On the parliamentary side, the CHP doesn't have as many votes. It's about just over 20%. Large difference. On the one side, Muharrem İnce. On the other side, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu's party. After the elections, could we see Muharrem İnce challenge Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu for the party leadership?
Well, I don't even remember when was the last time we saw CHP over 25. Yes, I think this will definitely trigger, if nothing else, with the CHP, a direction for the leadership to change. Whether it be Muharrem İnce or somebody else, but hopefully it will move in the direction when the new candidate, not even the chairman, but the new candidate will not include Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, who has, I think, now lost his 9th consecutive election as a party leader and still is in power. As I have said in many different programs, our problem in Turkey politically has been not much with with that in power, but with the opposition. We have had the use of opposition, no use of opposition for the last 8 to 10 years, and we need that. We need a good party, a good politicians, number of politicians to rule the country, but we also need a good number of oppositions to bring in new ideas, to enhance Turkey to the next level.
Okay, well, let's see how these numbers are going to pan out. Like we said, it's the first time that political alliances were able to form before the elections. On the one side, we have the People's Alliance. On the other side, we have the Nations Alliance and a non-aligned group, the HDP. Let's see what they're up to. Maria Ramos, bring us up to the numbers on where the alliances stand.
Alijan, thanks so much. It's very, very, very interesting. Things are changing by the second, literally. And right now, 60.2% of the parliamentary votes have been counted, and this is what it all looks like. So the People's Alliance, which is made up of the ruling AK Party and the MHP, well, they have right now 56.9% of the votes. Next, we have the Nations Alliance, and that's made up of the main opposition group, the CHP, joined in there with the brand new party, which isn't even a year old, the EU Party. And also in that mix is the Saadet Party and the Democrat Party. And look, they have 32% of the vote. But look at this, very, very interesting. The HDP, the pro-Kurdish group, inching closer and closer to that all-important 10% threshold. So, you know, well, there is still a long way to go, but they are just 2 percentage points away from that all-important number, 10%. And yes, just a reminder that 60.2% of the parliamentary votes have been counted. There is still a long way to go, lots of votes to be counted. And yes, this is absolutely historic. This is the first time in the history of Turkish politics that we have alliances. And there you have it, the People's Alliance there very firmly in the lead with 56.9% of the votes. Go ahead, Alijan and your guest, crunch those numbers for us.
Well, as Maria said, the HDP very close to that all-important 10% threshold. If they are able to pass that, a chunk of AK Party's current members of parliament would actually drop. They're currently standing at 352. Let's bring our Turkey political correspondent, Andrew Hopkins, who's joining us now live outside of the AK Party headquarters in Ankara. Andrew, during our last cross, we were talking about sort of the jubilant supporters there. Just give us an update. Are they very happy that their presidential candidate is actually out to a commanding lead? We'll get to the parliamentary race in just a bit.
Yes, Alijan, there's been in the last half hour or so quite a few people turned up here outside the AK Party headquarters in Ankara, party supporters cheering at the good results so far, really, for the Turkish president. It's a bit unclear as to where the parliamentary elections are going, as you say, at the moment. But with close to, I think, 70% of the vote counted now, the Turkish president on about 55%, he'll have to have quite a steep fall in his support in the next few hours to have to take part in a runoff vote. It's still a way to go, but it's looking like he's probably the favourite to win the election at the moment. A lot of high spirits here, a lot of support from party activist supporters have turned out here waving flags. What they hope will be a clear victory for the Turkish president this evening, another term in office after serving as the prime minister and also then as the president since 2014.
All right. Charity World, Andrew Hopkins joining us live from the Turkish capital of Ankara, just outside of the AK Party headquarters. All right, let's gauge what's happening in Turkey's largest city. Charity World's Caitlin McGee is in Istanbul, just outside of the presidential palace in Sarıyer, Hubert Palace, where President Erdogan will be is following the election results. Caitlin, we were talking to you about 15 minutes ago. Quite a jubilant crowd outside of the presidential palace there. Give a sense of what the people are feeling and asking for. I think there is a sense that they want Erdogan to come out much earlier than expected and actually give a victory speech.
Well,
supporters have been gathering for the last couple of hours. They're waving flags, they're chanting his name, they're absolutely fired up, and it's expected at some point, we're not sure exactly when, maybe in an hour or two, they will be allowed up to the presidential residence, and then Erdogan will come out and address them directly before he then leaves and moves on to Ankara to watch the rest of the results come through for the evening. Now, these people are absolutely delighted with the early lead that Erdogan seems to be taking. It's still early doors in the evening yet, but if this trend continues, then it looks like Erdogan has managed to fend off one of the biggest political challenges of his career. Certainly in the last couple of weeks, in the build-up to this vote, the presidential race looked like it was going to be much tighter than it is at the moment. Erdogan was facing off against an increasingly disciplined, organised and galvanised opposition in the form of CHP candidate Muharrem İnce. Now, it looks like Erdogan at the moment is leading in that crucial Istanbul district. We talked about that earlier. He knew that he had to get that district if he was going to get across the line, particularly if he was going to get across that 50% threshold to avoid a runoff. It looks like he is well in the lead at the moment, and the campaigning that he's done here, probably in the last couple of days, may have paid off.
All right, Caitlin McGee in Istanbul, Turkey's largest city, following the president in Sarıyer, just outside of the Hubei presidential palace. Well, Turkey is voting in parliamentary and presidential elections, as we've stated, after facing big challenges over the past 4 years. Let's have a closer look at some of them.
Suriye'deki gelişmelerin hızlandığı, makroekonomik dengelerden büyük yatırımlara kadar.
All right, let's bring back our panel of experts. We've talked about the ruling AK Party. We've talked about the main opposition CHP party. Time to talk about some of the other political parties, the E Party and the MHP. Let's start off with the E Party. If the E Party wasn't in this race, it would have been an easier task for President Erdogan? Onur?
It may or may not have been. Going back to our earlier question, though, I think this is a good time to underline this. If the elections were to result like this, where HDP is out, AK Party has an overwhelming majority on the floor as well.
What do you mean overwhelming? I mean parliamentary majority, over 301.
By itself.
Okay.
I think the plan for President Erdogan would have been still to include E-Party in some way down the road. President Erdogan is never a leader that calculates today or yesterday. He likes to calculate as 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ahead of time. When President Erdogan started the relationship of forming some kind of a alignment with MHP, he set out the rules. I think after the elections, E-Party or part of E-Party may be a good candidate to join this some alliance of projects, alliance of thought, alliance of reactions and actions to what's going on with and about Turkey. So that may be coming up. If E Party was in the picture, would it have been an easier race for President Erdogan? The numbers right now, the way it seems, E Party may have gotten as much or maybe a little bit less votes from CHP than what do you call MHP. So, and they may have even gotten some votes from HDP as well. I think looking at the picture, the least votes that they got within those three parties may have as well been AK Party right now.
Okay, Selim?
Well, what I know is in Turkey, a newly established party requires more than one election to prove itself. So
we didn't see that with the AK Party in 2002.
Well, that's the exception, I was going to say. But for E Party, again, what are going to be the dynamics? The 10% threshold or not makes a major difference in existence. It's a matter of existence or not. But on the other hand, just beyond all this debate, how will the executive president shape the political spectrum, partly in retribution to Onur's commentary? We haven't witnessed that yet. A presidential executive president will surely have some influence on the parliament, even outside of parliament, and he will have a really crucial role in shaping the political spectrum. How? We have to see that.
How can that be, Kilic?
Well, one thing to add in E-Party, the disappointment is basically everybody was expecting that there should be a strong opposition candidate. Even AK Party members, when they were talking about the opposition, they were telling that the absence of a credible opposition in Turkey is also a threat for democracy, because then the street politics start, then the people started to have these demonstrations. So they were expecting a candidate credible, but when we look at Meral Akşener, she basically failed to provide a comprehensive program, a rhetoric, and a hope for the opposition. Because of that, when we look at that, even among the opposition voters, she wasn't very much favored by the voters. So what we see is basically, in addition to some of the MHP votes, she got some of the CHP votes, especially in the western part, and she may got at most 1% from AK Party. So the absence of Meral Akşener wouldn't change any dynamic. I think if the election ends like this, especially the parliamentary level, we will see that the biggest surprise is MHP. Because all of the electoral polls show MHP around 6 to 7%. And here is the thing. When I talk with the people who were following this election closely in terms of organizing these polls and everything, they were telling that the surprise will be E-Party. Because when we look at the polls, it shows everything between 7% to 14%. And the MHP part was always between 5 to 7%. But what we see is right now, MHP is doing more than 12. And the pollsters were right about E-Party, although the range was really big. It was kind of, like they couldn't fulfill the expectations of many. But MHP will be the biggest surprise of this election if the votes of the MHP continues to be more than 12%.
Okay, let's talk about MHP. Did they feel that they had to align themselves with the AK Party in these elections, sort of to continue their political future?
Not really, but surely Mr. Bahçeli had at times showed quite a responsible line in just occasionally staying behind, occasionally not trying to overshadow President Erdogan. So the main line, I think, for MHP and its leader, Mr. Bahçeli, was to be the responsible side, to be the party that supports the state, the grassroots movement that supports the traditions of the Turkish Republic and the historical responsibility. So this being responsible, being politically responsible was the concept we heard from the MHP side a lot.
Can I add something about the MHP part? When we look at why people vote for the certain political parties, when we analyze MHP voters, you will see that the ideological voters are the biggest margin. So when the people went to MHP sympathizers went to the polls, when they see the party emblem in the conversation, they basically said that, okay, things may not be that rosy for our party right now, but I like that, you know, like the three crescents, so I will vote for that party. So that ideological, I think, stickiness continues. And it is something that the sociologists and political scientists need to study after that. Is it because of the family connection, family ties? Is it because of some other reasons that MHP, despite the, you know, like the splitter party, despite the lack of too many, you know, like political characters or very charismatic leaders, continues to have this, you know, like the 12 to 13% vote in each and every election. And 12 to 13% votes means around 6-7 million voters, which is huge.
Selim, are the nationalists the most faithful voters in Turkey?
Seems so. And the party line just matters a lot. And apparently traditions matter a lot. And also maybe we should take into consideration the first-time voters.
Yes, the over 1 million Turkish voters who are voting for...
And what were their contribution to the MHP votes?
That's a fair point. All right, time to take a look, get an update on the numbers, both presidential and parliamentary. Let's bring in Maria Ramos. What do you have for us this time around?
Alijan, I have a very significant development for you on the parliamentary front, and take a look at this. So with 66.4% of the votes counted, the People's Alliance still there. We're in the lead with 56.3%, which translates as 404 seats. And of course, the magic number was to get that majority in Parliament was 301 seats. There, of course, they have it, but a reminder, caution. Only 66.4% of the votes have been counted, so we cannot go with those numbers yet. The night is still young, still a long way to go. The Nations Alliance there with 32.4%, which translates as 195 seats. And the very interesting development that we have right now with 66.4% of the votes counted is that the HDP is just 1 percentage point away from that all-important 10% threshold, and that could jump any second now. So we'll keep a very close eye on that. And just a reminder to our viewers that it is so important for all these alliances, for anyone to get into the parliament, they have to cross that 10% threshold. And I will pass it now back to you, Alijan, and your guests to really look at why the HDP is at that mark. And you've been talking about surprises a lot. Is this a surprise for your guests? Alijan, back to you.
Maria, thank you for bringing us up an update on the numbers. The HDP, 0.1% away from that all-critical 10% threshold. TRT World's Melinda Nusifori joins us now from Diyarbakir in southeastern Turkey, an HDP stronghold. Melinda, what's the mood like in terms of the presidential race? Not too hopeful because Selahattin Demirtas is not doing too well, but their party, the HDP, is nearing that all-important threshold. What are you seeing? Give us a sense of what the mood is like.
Well, just in the last half an hour or so, people have really started to gather outside the city's election counting centre. They were really eager to know if the HDP were going to reach that 10% threshold. The crowd was building, they were starting to chat. Police were getting a little bit edgy. They started to surround that crowd because there was a fear that if HDP didn't reach that 10% threshold, that there could be some violence. But it looks like that fear is now unfounded. There's still, in the parliamentary vote at least, there's still about another 50% of votes to be counted in Diyarbakir, and we're already looking like the HDP have hit that 10% target. This is incredibly important for the people here in this region, a largely Kurdish majority here in the southeast. They will be incredibly pleased with that result. It means that they could have maybe more than 60 members of parliament, which is a great showing. So we'll have to wait and see as those votes continue to trickle in, but the mood here is certainly jubilant.
You said that tensions were running high. Obviously, all eyes on that all-important 10% threshold. Pre-election violence, there was some, especially in a border province in Suruç. 4 people were killed. you were actually at some polling stations throughout the day. What was the atmosphere like? Because many of the presidential candidates had called on all of their voters to actually display a sense of calm, to wait for the results, to not display any acts of extremism. What was it like where you were at today?
Yes, that event in Search was a very disappointing blemish in the lead up to these presidential and parliamentary elections. Where I am in Diyarbakir, this area is no stranger to violence during elections. During the 2015 election campaign, homemade bombs exploded and killed 4 people at election rallies here. And then after the AK party declared victory in the 2015 elections, there were riots in the street and police had to use tear gas and water cannons to disperse that crowd. So people were on edge as they were heading to the polls this morning. But the locals have told us that it was incredibly peaceful. Once they got to those ballot boxes, they felt a sense of calm. They said there was no tension on the streets. There wasn't that sense of violence or aggression. They said they felt very safe at those polling stations. There was a large police presence around Diyarbakir, particularly at the polling booths themselves, but that seemed to calm people down as opposed to agitate them, and they said it felt very different to other elections that they've experienced in this region. So a very positive outcome for the people here as with regards to the security and their sense of calm and democratic purpose here in Diyarbakir.
All right, TRT World's Melinda Nusifora reporting live for us in Diyarbakir. Some breaking news. The HDP has surpassed the 10% threshold. They now have 10.1. If they're able to sort of hold on to this percentage, it means they'll be able to put into parliament 63 members of parliament. It is the highest number of members of parliament after the CHP, so higher than the MHP and higher than the E party. All of a sudden, the AK party's MPs in parliament have gone down to 303. Yep. So Kilic, back to your thing, razor-thin margin for the AK party in terms of parliamentary majority. This can change. Yeah. Onur, let's actually get sort of an analysis from you in terms of this latest development with HDP passing the threshold.
Well, this was something expected. A lot of people talked about that this will happen, and this will happen due to a large support from the CHP on the parliamentary level so that they would pass the threshold and be in the parliament. Well, looks like, at least for the last 16 years, CHP pretty much succeeded on something that they tried on the election day. They actually, succeeded to have HDP passed. Going back to an earlier issue, and I just looked as we were in a break, it was the first time that CHP actually passed 25% of the votes in any election since 1983.
In terms of, you're talking about Muharrem İnce's 29.7% right now.
Yeah, it's the first time that they actually passed 25% level, threshold since 1983. So yes, our hats off to Mr. Ince as a CHP. Maybe CHP is next leader. But again, as I said, I didn't know about HDP passing, but as I said, in the coming days, we may see some more people joining the Cumhur Alliance in the parliament, in terms of, adding things to Turkey, not just in terms of politics, because don't forget, if the race ends this way, Mr. President Erdogan will be elected as president again, and he does not need the parliament to be in power. He does not need the parliament to stay in power, but he needs the parliament and the power of parliament to enhance Turkey in a faster manner, is actually what the word is.
Okay. Selim Atalay, what does it mean for the HDP having more MPs than the MHP right now?
Let's look at the previous experience. How did they use the previous representation in the parliament? Was the HDP's representation in the parliament contributing to the general peace and general benefit of the republic or not? Representing a political party, political group in the parliament is the greatest achievement you can have. But being represented in the parliament and still not cutting off its ties with a terrorist organization is their biggest their biggest burden, and it seems to continue.
But this is something that's basically the Turkish electorate has not paid attention to then.
One more thing, Turkish electorate or the tactical electorate that we were talking earlier, Mr. Demirtaş's support is less than the party support. There's just like 3-point difference in between.
This is pretty much
Selahattin Demirtaş, 7.2,
exactly.
the HDP over 10.1. So where's this coming from?
Which one is the real HDP electorate, the party or the Demirtaş? Demirtaş electorate is the core electorate.
Obviously, CHP's help.
CHP, in order to block Erdogan, as they have been their motto.
And let's not forget over here that CHP, by doing this, not only helped HDP to go into the parliament, but has also made sure that the HDP got roughly 15 more seats in the parliament than MHP, who has gotten 500,000 more votes. So talk about abusing the power of a party. Talk about abusing the place that you're sitting in a political party, and stealing other parties' votes.
Kilic, I know that you want to jump in and actually talk about sort of the difference in percentage votes in which party leaders are getting when compared to their parties.
Well, it shows that, most of the voters, since there are two elections at the same time, it gave a lot of flexibility for the voters to vote tactically. And for the HDP, there was, some of the journalists close to CHP were promoting to vote for HDP because they kind of understand that the presidential election will be won by President Erdogan. But at least in the parliament, in order to stop AK Party, they were considering this as the only solution to put HDP in the parliament. And it shows that actually there is the support for HDP is running low in the region as well, especially when we look at the Istanbul votes. At this point in Istanbul, HDP is getting 12.3% of the votes, and which would be showing that it's getting more votes from Istanbul than Diyarbakir.
An interesting point. Let's actually continue with sort of the composition of the next Turkish parliament. AK Party right now, 301, just at that level of parliamentary majority. Kilic?
It would be one of the most significant questions would be President Erdogan, one of the things that he mentioned multiple times in the campaign was the very powerful parliament, which would help, which would coordinate with the president. And although he never said there will be an early election or something, this will put, because in the campaign also he put most of the ministers actually as the parliamentarian candidate. And the expectation was at least, if they get more than 320, these parliamentarians can resign and then they can be ministers. So at this point, it would basically challenge that expectation. And it would be a question if it continues like this and if it ends with 301, the question would be who would be the new minister. So at this point, most of the ministers who are elected in the parliament right now cannot resign, not to lose that razor-thin majority for AK Party.
Okay, so this is the analysis. Let's actually take a closer look at the numbers. Our Maria Ramos is standing by on our virtual reality sets. Maria, we just reported that the predominantly Kurdish HDP party surpassed that all-important 10% threshold. Just break down those numbers for us and for our viewers.
Okay, Alican, yes, I will break down those numbers, but let me bring you one very important number right now. A very significant development I have for you, that the AK Party have now 300 seats only. Therefore, they have lost the majority in Parliament. But caution, caution, caution. This is only with 74.8% of the ballots counted. But as you'll recall, they did have much more votes at the beginning of the night. So this is what it looks like right now. They did have, they needed 301 to have the majority, but right now they have 300 seats only. So what will that mean for the AK Party in their alliance there? in the People's Alliance. Who will they have to go to get a majority? And I'll look at some other numbers for you now. So the Nations Alliance there with 32.9%, 185 seats. And the HDP, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, they have crossed that all-important 10% threshold and now are just at 10.1% with 64 seats. So that is what the parliamentary votes look like right now. It is nearly 9 o'clock in Istanbul, and the latest news is that the AK Party have lost their majority in the People's Alliance there, and they have 300 seats, okay, and they needed 301. That was the magic number, 301, to have the majority in Parliament. Ali Can and your guests, what does this all mean for Turkish politics right now?
Exactly what we're going to talk about. 3 hours into our rolling coverage, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the incumbent candidate, sits in the driver's seat in terms of the presidential race, with 54.3% of the votes counted, 54.2% of the votes gained, and more than 80% of the votes counted. The race on the parliamentary side is a little bit closer, as we've just heard from Maria. AK Party, if the elections were to end right now, the vote counting ending right now, AK Party does not have a parliamentary majority. The HDP, the predominantly Kurdish HDP, is now in parliament. I know it's been a long night for all of us, but let's get some final comments from you, starting from you, Onur.
I know it's not an exact system of electing the president, but if we had to compare our system and the election process, it would probably be more similar to that in the States. To my knowledge, in the last 100 years, there hasn't been a serious more than 2 people race in the U.S. presidential elections, except for, I think it was 92, Perot, Clinton, and Bush race.
Well, Ross Perot ran twice, but
yeah, but the first one, the more important one. And that was only a 3-way race. And there, Bill Clinton, I think, got 43% of the votes. So this shows you, although in our system, it's imperative that you get 50 plus 1, but in our system, President Erdogan just ran against 5 different candidates, and he still was able to win. And as I said earlier, for me, anything above 51, 52%, for me was a landslide in this system with this many candidates. To show this performance, it is just unbelievable, and it'll definitely be noted by everybody around the world, the level of support that he gets despite against all odds.
Selim, Atalay?
Major win for Recep Tayyip Erdogan, because this election, the opposition tried to turn it against let's not re-elect Erdogan thing. And the results are there. It didn't work, and he's even stronger now. So that is major success. Number 2, for the much speculated HDP Kurdish question, there was one line from President Erdogan that actually missed in between the coverage. He said, Kurds have one state that is called the Turkish Republic, and that was a call for the region's whole Kurdish population, and that needs to be taken into consideration in the new term. Kurds have a state, and it's called the Republic of Turkey.
Kilic?
I agree with him. It is a major victory for President Erdogan, and most of the polls actually showed that he was winning with 51 to 52%. At this point, he got more than 54% of the votes, so it's a major victory for him. It's a major victory for MHP as well. Despite all odds, at this point, it looks like they are getting 12%. And it's a major victory for the alliance, actually, that AK Party and MHP formed. At this point, their votes are more than 55%. So it was the only, at this point, the question mark is if AK Party will continue to get the parliamentary majority or not. And if they will not get the majority, how the new cabinet will be formed. Those are the most significant questions right now. But as we go along, probably the headlines tomorrow will be another major victory for Erdogan in the elections.
All right, as is, the AK Party has only 299. That number may go up, may go down throughout the evening. But, gentlemen, I want to thank you, Onur Erim, political writer, Selim Atalay, journalist and commentator, and Kilic, thank you for joining us from Washington, D.C. He's the research director at the SETA Foundation.